I know from experience, because of the people that I work with, that the majority of entrepreneurs or small business owners, solopreneurs, they're absolutely terrified. You say the word analytics and they'll like kind of visibly back up, or they'll turn around and run away. You can see it in their eyes. They run a mile away, if you mention that. So people are afraid of numbers. And I was interested that you said that there's a conversation happening between visitors to your website and, your business. Can you just expand a little bit on that, on just on the concept of how do you make it easy for business owners to turn those numbers, those scary numbers, into a story that illuminates that conversation?
It's a really great question. So the big challenge, I think, with platforms like Google Analytics, right? Let's just use that one as an example because it's free and everybody has access to it. The challenge is, you're right in that people go, I'm not a numbers person, so now I'm going to go into Google Analytics, which already sounds horrible, and now I'm going to go look at a bunch of numbers, which is like my nightmare if I'm not a numbers person, right? So then you go in with that attitude of like, okay, I have to take my medicine. Let's figure this thing out. But I've already decided I hate this stuff. So when I get into it, I'm not going to see really what's there because I really just want to go, So I think from the outset, it's helping to change the conversation about how to look at this tool. So you don't go into it with that. And there are reasons that if you do go into it like that, of course, you're going to have a poor experience with it. And let's tackle the numbers person thing first to kind of back up a little bit. So the way that if I gave you a kid's book and I said, let's say it was Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and I give you this children's book and I said, could you read this book to me? You probably could do a pretty good job of reading that book. Now, if I take that book back and I say, okay, and I rip out all the pages and I rip those pages into pieces, I put all those pieces between the covers and I hand that book back to you and I say, could you read this book to me? Could you read the book?
After I'd spent quite a few hundred of hours putting it back together.
Exactly right. Right. And there are people who listen to this podcast going, there's no way I could read the book. But that's not true, because I didn't change your ability to read, right? You can absolutely read the book. To your point, it's going to take you hundreds of hours because you're going to dump out the puzzle pieces, try to put them all together. Some of them are going to get smashed behind the couch and you're going to lose those. So you got to make up parts of the story that you can't find anymore. Well, by default, right? By default, a tool like Google Analytics is just a bunch of ripped up pieces of paper. That's all it is. It's a bunch of data that, because people turn on the platform and they think they've set it up, but they've just activated it. It starts filling with a bunch of information. All that information isn't put in the correct way. And so it's a bunch of ripped up pieces of paper. So when you get back there, right? Like imagine this, imagine a library where every single book was ripped up pieces of paper. And then going into that and going, I don't understand why everybody else can seem to read this stuff, but I can't. And it's not because you don't know how to read. You know how to read. It's that it's really hard because there's no connection between the data points. There's no story there, right? And so what you do with a platform like this is it's not about using the platform. And that's the number one mistake. People think, well, I'm just going to have to, like, I always think of it to like a hacking through the digital jungle of data that I've got. And I'm going to hack through all of this until I find this one little thing that's going to be this magical insight that's going to change my world forever as a marketer. Like that is a myth. It doesn't exist. But when you take the time to go through a certain framework, right, of how you're thinking about this, one of the first things is have a question in mind. Something we say, when you go into Google Analytics, you never go in unprepared. You always go in with a specific question. So for example, most individuals will go into GA with Google Analytics and they say, well, let's just see what we can see here. And then you say users and they see sessions and then they see a bunch of data. Now there's no story. They had no question. So they have a bunch of information. They get overloaded and they go, well, I'm not a numbers person, so I have no idea what this means. I'll give you a hint or a big little secret here. I would also have no idea what that means. And I am a numbers person, right? It's just a bunch of numbers. It doesn't mean anything. There is no meaning there. But if I went in there and let's say you go into it and you say, well, I need to see how many users I had yesterday. Well, now you go to Google Analytics, you change the date to yesterday, you look at users and it goes 75. Okay, now you know you had 75 users, right? Then the next question you might say, well, how many of those became a lead yesterday? How many of those users, how many became a lead? Well, in Google Analytics, you might set up a goal that says when they become a lead, trigger this little goal. It's not that hard to set up. Anybody can Google and find that out. But when you do that, now you can go to Google Analytics and say, well, of the 75 people, 7 became a lead. It's like, okay, well, now I know roughly 10% of the people are becoming a lead. And now you start to see a story, right? Then you can go into Google Analytics and say, well, which traffic sources became leads? And it might say, well, half of them came from Facebook. The other half came from Google organic search results. And now you start to go, okay, well, now I understand that half my leads are coming from Facebook. The other half are coming from search. and then my opt-in rate is only 10%. So maybe I can do some work there. Well, now all of a sudden you have actions that are starting to naturally appear, just in us describing this little, imaginary event here. But the only reason that happened is because I asked a question first, then went into Google Analytics for the answer. Now, there are going to be times where you go into Google Analytics and it just goes, I don't know. Like I might say, well, how many purchases did I make? And I might go to the e-commerce reports and maybe that hasn't been set up yet. So Google Analytics is going to go like, I don't know. I don't have that information. In which case I go, okay, no harm, no foul. I'm now going to go learn how to make sure that e-commerce information is in Google Analytics, or figure out how to turn that on for my platform. Then when I go back to it next week and ask it, it's going to tell me, oh, you had 7 purchases. Where did they come from? Oh, half came from Google Organic. The other half came from your retargeting campaign for Google. And you're like, okay, now I'm starting to get some more insight. I'm starting to understand how I'm getting the results that I'm getting. And ultimately I can take better actions because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like that. You start with a question in mind, and then do what you need to do to be able to get the answer. And Google Analytics will give it to you